A generation of young people may never be able to own their own homes because of a grave housing crisis. Here's why. This country is not building enough homes. It means there's more demand as the population grows, but limited supply, and that means higher prices. A record number made homeless, a younger generation facing no chance of affording a home. To understand this, we've got to go back in time for context. The post-war period saw a golden age of home ownership. To some, the idea of owning your home was part of the national psyche. Clement Attlee's post-war Labour government built more than 1 million homes, 80% of which were council houses, largely to replace those bombed during the war. The house building boom continued when the Conservatives returned to power in 1951.
To build homes.
It reached its highest peak in the 1970s, with more than 300,000 homes built. The average house price then was around £10,000. But it gradually decreased when Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher championed the Right to Buy scheme in 1980. This policy gave council tenants of at least 3 years the opportunity to buy their homes at a generous discount, fulfilling a Conservative promise of a property-owning democracy. By 1990, 1.5 million homes had been sold. By 2023, that number rose to 2.3 million. It was aspirational, popular and profitable. Over 40 years, it earned the Treasury £47 billion. Now, that might sound like a lot, but £1 billion a year over 40 years is a drop in earnings compared to the Treasury's annual budget of £132.7 billion. More importantly, the UK has paid a price in lost social housing. The UK's social housing sector has been shrinking. In 1973, council housing accounted for nearly 30% of the total number of homes in the UK. 5 decades later, that number has dropped to just over 6%, as privately owned or rented homes make up the majority of the market. These sales meant a depletion in council housing stock, construction slowed, rents for council tenants rose, the population grew, demand ultimately outstripped supply. All made worse by the refusal of successive governments to allow councils to spend the windfall they received from sales on building new homes. So why hasn't the UK built enough housing? Well, here's a word you might recognise: NIMBYs. It stands for Not in My Backyard. A building boom in the interwar period was met with a backlash from suburban residents. They argued that the large-scale expansion of urban areas caused pollution, congestion and the destruction of green spaces. The result? The 1947 Town and Country Planning Act, designed to control urban sprawl. This established the concept of planning permission on a case-by-case basis, a sort of local veto, but there are other reasons. Then came the buy-to-let phenomenon. The 1988 Housing Act meant that many renters went on assured short-hold tenancies. This gave landlords and lenders more peace of mind around tenants leaving a property, and it also reduced rent regulation, meaning that landlords could charge whatever they liked for a property. Buy-to-let mortgages then followed. People bought up former local authority housing to rent out at considerable rates as a source of income. 41% of all council homes sold under the Right to Buy scheme are now being let on the private market. At the same time, house prices have been rising faster than wages since the 1990s. The average price of a property in England and Wales is now more than 8 times the average salary. What's more, the chronic housing shortage has left 1.2 million people on waiting lists for local authority housing. And local councils are warning that they could potentially be facing bankruptcy as they are overspending their budgets on temporary accommodation like hostels and hotels instead of providing other services. In 2004, under the premiership of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, then Chancellor, commissioned Kate Barker, a former Bank of England economist, to try to sort out housing supply. Her report laid out some of the problems and made policy recommendations like building many more homes and reforming the planning system, both of which are still massively relevant today. 21 years on, not much has changed. So what's happened since? A report published by the Home Builders Federation found that only 11 of the 36 recommendations in Barker's report are still in place today. And over those 20 plus years, there have been 16 housing secretaries, but not much progress. The latest is Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, a former trade union representative who grew up on a council estate. Rayner benefited from the Right to Buy scheme when she bought her council house in 2007 with a 25% discount, making a reported £48,500 profit when selling it 8 years later, which some believe is just one example of the overall housing problem. The Deputy Prime Minister promised reform of the policy, but after reports that Right to Buy was to be axed, Ms Rayner told Sky News,
"Far too many families at the moment are in temporary accommodation because we don't have social housing."
So do you want it scrapped, or?
I don't want Right to Buy scrapped. We're doing a consultation on it at the moment. I'm very clear that people should have the right to buy, but we can't have a situation where the taxpayers have invested in social housing, which we want to build a generation of social housing with the 1.5 million homes, but then I can't have them going out the back door at a very high discount where we can't replace them because we need social housing in this country.
So what has the new government promised? This new Labour government has pledged an ambitious target of building 1.5 million homes in 5 years to deal with the critical shortage of housing.
There can be fewer bigger priorities for us than preventing homelessness, one of the biggest pressures that you face. By getting Britain building again, speeding up the planning system and reintroducing mandatory housing targets, I know that this will mean asking more from local councils.
Research published last year by the Centre for Cities think tank showed that compared to the average European country, Britain today has a backlog of 4.3 million homes that are missing from the national housing market as they were never built, tracing the problem back to 1947. They say it would take at least half a century to fill that gap, even if the government's target of building 300,000 new homes a year was met. Tackling the problem sooner would require 442,000 homes to be built every year over the next 25 years, or 654,000 homes to be built every year over the next decade in England alone. So where does this leave us? Well, there's a big divide between older people who own property and younger people who don't. Owners versus forever renters. The haves versus the have-nots. In 2017, 35% of 25 to 34-year-olds were homeowners compared with 55% in 1997. In 2022, just 10% of homeowners in England were aged under 35. Meanwhile, the UK's renters, predominantly made up of the young, also known as Generation Rent, are spending an average of more than a third of their income on rent, while in many cities that rises to over 40%, outstripping the amount that could be spent on a monthly mortgage. Many are forced to move back in with their parents. According to the last census, taken 3 years ago, there were almost 5 million adults living with their families. So what is the solution, and is building more homes the answer? The pro-house building lobby, who call themselves YIMBYs, short for Yes in My Backyard, argue that building more housing stock will improve affordability. An increase in supply could meet demands and cause a fall in house prices, while also easing rents. It's a problem that successive governments have failed to solve. And now Labour is saying that it's going to get Britain building again. But can this government make that a reality for Generation Rent?